The next item of business is Stage 3 proceedings on the Social Security Administration and Tribunal Membership Scotland Bill. In dealing with the amendments, members should have with them the bill as amended at Stage 2, the marshalled list and the groupings. And I would just remind members that the division bell will sound and proceedings will be suspended for a short technical break should there be a division. I would also encourage all members who wish to speak in any debate on any group of amendments to press their button to speak as soon as the group is called. So we turn now to the marshalled list. Can I call Amendment 1 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, Shirley Ann Somerville, in a group on its own, Cabinet Secretary to speak to and move Amendment 1.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This is a short technical amendment to fix numerical ordering in the 2018 Social Security Act. Section 96(2) of the 2018 Act is a numerical list of sections of the Act under which regulations are made by the affirmative procedure. One of the listed sections of the 2018 Act is Section 75. However, Section 5 of this bill reorders the 2018 Act and moves Section 75 to become Section 84A. So Section 96(2) of the 2018 Act requires amendment so that the reference to Section 75 is omitted and the list contains a reference to Section 84A. That's what Section 5(8) of the bill does. The present provision places the reference to Section 84A in the list after Section 85 when it should be before Section 85, and I trust that members are content and will support this minor tidying amendment.
Thank you very much, Minister. Nobody else, no members indicated they wish to speak. I take it the Cabinet Secretary doesn't wish to add any comments. The question therefore is that Amendment 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed, thank you. Group 2, this is uprating for inflation. Can I call Amendment 2 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, group with Amendment 3 and Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 2 and speak to both amendments in the group?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The new Scottish Child Payment will play a vital role in tackling child poverty, and when announced first in June 2019, we made a commitment that the payment would be uprated annually in line with inflation. We already have the power to increase the value of the payment through amendments to the Scottish Child Payment Regulations, but our statutory duties to report on and uprate certain forms of assistance in Sections 77 and 78 of the Social Security Scotland Act 2018 do not extend to the child payment. That is why I made clear in our response to the Scottish Commission on Social Security's report onto the Scottish Child Payment Regulations published on the 8th of September my intention to bring forward substantive amendments at Stage 3 of this bill to ensure that we enshrine in law the annual uprating of the Scottish child payments in line with inflation. Sections 77 and 78 of the 2018 Act contain the existing overarching provision on uprating. However, as the Scottish Child Payment is to be made under top-up powers in Section 79 of the Act, it is not covered by existing duties. Amendment 2 modifies Section 77 of the 2018 Act so that the existing duty to report to Parliament annually on the inflation-adjusted level of all forms of assistance that are payable under Part 2 of the Act is now extended to also require ministers to report on the inflation-adjusted level of all forms of top-up assistance that are payable under regulations under Section 79. Amendment 2 also modifies Section 78 of the 2018 Act to require ministers to bring forward regulations uprating the value of the Scottish Child Payment in line with its inflation-adjusted level. Since Sections 77 and 78 as modified will relate to assistance under Parts 2 and 3 of the 2018 Act, Amendment 2 also moves those sections to Part 4 of the Act and renumbers them as Sections 86A and 86B. Amendment 3 then makes provision in connection with this reordering of the bill to provide that anything done under Section 77 or 78 of the 2018 Act before the date on which the relevant provisions of this bill come into force will be treated after that date as having been done under the renumbered sections. As first payments of the Scottish Child Payment will start from the end of February 2021, the duty to uprate annually will be made effective from April 2022 and will be brought forward into force by commencement regulations likely to be in late 2021, made under Section 11 of this bill. And I would urge members to support and I move the amendment 2 in my name.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. And again, no other member has indicated they wish to contribute in this section. So we'll go straight to the question. The question is that Amendment 2 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. I call Amendment 3, Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 3 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you. And we turn to our final group. This is on the suspension of assistance. Can I call Amendment 4 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary in a group on its own? Cabinet Secretary to move and speak to Amendment 4.
Presiding Officer, Amendment 4 is another minor technical amendment to the provisions on suspensions introduced at Stage 2 of the Bill. This amendment makes clear that the ability to suspend payments should be Social Security Scotland's first choice, where an individual has failed for the first time to supply information by the date set by the agency. Where assistance is suspended after requesting information from the individual, Social Security Scotland will be required to ask for the information again and allow a further period for this to be supplied. If an individual fails to supply information for a second time, Social Security Scotland will have the power to terminate entitlement to assistance. I want to make very clear, as I did at Stage 2, that whilst we will have the power to terminate entitlement at this point, that the outcome is not predetermined. Case managers will consider all of the information that is held before making their determination. The decision to terminate entitlement will not be taken lightly and will be used as the last step in a process, not the first. We will continue to work in a cooperative, fair way with all clients in seeking to obtain the information we need to ensure that people continue to be paid the right amount at the right time. My priority is to avoid clients being overpaid assistance and to develop a fair process that is tailored to individual circumstances. And as amendments made at Stage 2 make clear, our system of suspensions has important safeguards, including the need to consider an individual's financial circumstances and the right to request a review. This minor technical amendment ensures that we will fulfil the expectations of stakeholders and ensures the effective functioning of Scotland's social security system. And I move Amendment 4 in my name.
Thank you very much. And again, no member has indicated they wish to contribute in this section. Go straight to the question. The question is that Amendment 4 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed, and that ends consideration of amendments. Now, as members will be aware, at this point in proceedings, I'm required under standing orders to decide whether or not, in my view, any provision of the bill relates to a protected subject matter. That is, whether it modifies the electoral system or the franchise for Scottish parliamentary elections. In the case of this bill, in my view, no provision relates to a protected subject matter. Therefore, the bill does not require a supermajority to be passed at Stage 3. And we're going to move on shortly to the next item of business. There will just be a short pause while we change seats.
The next item of business is the Stage 3 debate on Motion 22845 in the name of Shirley-Ann Somerville on the Social Security Administration and Tribunal Membership Scotland Bill. I invite those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now. And I call on Shirley-Ann Somerville to speak to and move the motion. Cabinet Secretary, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to begin this debate by thanking all of those who have contributed to and supported the development of this legislation. I know that the past months have been hard on everyone, and I'm therefore particularly grateful to those organisations, groups and individuals who have worked hard to help us with this bill and to improve it along the process. I'd like to start with grateful thanks to the members of the Scottish Government's Disability and Carers Benefits Expert Advisory Group and our Ill Health and Disability Benefits Stakeholder Reference Group, colleagues in the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, the Chief Medical Officer and Chief Nursing Officer and staff in their offices. Their work has been invaluable in ensuring this bill is as it is today. I would also like to thank the various stakeholder groups who have contributed, including Citizens Advice Scotland, the Child Poverty Action Group, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the Scottish Action on Mental Health, Inclusion Scotland and the Health and Social Care Alliance. And I'd also like to extend my thanks to all the members of the Social Security Committee, past and present, their convener and the clerking team, who have supported a process of parliamentary scrutiny undertaken under difficult and unprecedented circumstances. I would also, of course, very much like to thank my bill team in private office for their support throughout. As this list of involved and interesting parties makes clear, this bill is broad in the range of matters that it is covering. It is an important package of changes to the framework of Scottish social security legislation, which is still very new. The changes it will make are necessary, they are valuable, and in the case of provisions required before the launch of this government's brand new benefit, the Scottish Child Payment, also urgent. I'll take a little time now just to talk through some of the improvements that I believe have been made to the bill during its earlier stages. In relation to appointees, I'm pleased that we've been able to ensure that the bill now includes safeguards to ensure that the process of appointment is not misused. The guidelines which govern how decisions on appointments should be made will now be on a statutory footing, and a list of safeguarding principles, including principles drawn from the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, was added at stage 2. These provisions will ensure that whenever an appointment is made, it will always be the best and most appropriate arrangement for the individual. In the event that those arrangements are not appropriate, the bill now provides for the right to apply to the first-tier tribunal for a review of the appointment decision. A second improvement has been the extension of the existing duty in the 2018 Act to inform individuals of their potential eligibility for other forms of assistance. This was based on the committee's recommendation that Section 53 duty should be extended to cover benefits, such as the Scottish Child Payment, that are made using the top-up powers in Section 79 of the 2018 Act. I was more than happy to accept that recommendation. Promoting the take-up of Scotland's social security benefits and removing the barriers to claim entitlements is the right thing to do. It encapsulates many of the principles of the 2018 Social Security Act, including that it is an investment in the people of Scotland, that social security is indeed a human right, that the Scottish social security system is there to contribute to reducing poverty in Scotland, and that delivery of social security is a public service. The bill also makes some adjustments to provide for cases where a diagnosis of terminal illness is made by a medical professional based out with the UK, who will of course not be subject to our Chief Medical Officer's guidance. It does not specify how healthcare professionals should be trained in the new guidance. This was discussed in detail during stage 2, when I made clear that I absolutely recognise that the improved terminal illness definition in Scotland introduces a change to the way some of our health professionals will carry out their duties in relation to terminally ill patients. That is why the CMO guidance is very detailed, and that's also why we have taken other steps to ensure the right support is in place. For example, by developing additional support measures with the Terminal Illness National Implementation Group. I am pleased that, in the end, we have agreed a sensible approach to ensuring that only appropriate health professionals provide a clinical judgment by including a number of requirements and criteria in a combination of regulations and the Chief Medical Officer's guidance. A clear case was also made during the bill process that we should provide for suspension and non-payment of assistance in a very narrow and specific range of circumstances. So, to ensure that there will not be any negative consequences of the use of these provisions, there are a number of safeguards to ensure that the rights of the individual are respected at all times. Our amendments to allow for the value of certain types of assistance to be set at zero will also only be used when it will be of benefit to that individual. For example, by allowing payments of specific ongoing benefits to be restarted more quickly when the individual's stay in a care home or in hospital has come to an end. And I'm pleased that organisations such as the Child Poverty Action Group, Citizens Advice Scotland, Inclusion Scotland and the Alliance have all responded positively to these changes and that they consider them to be improvements to the legislation. The final way in which I think the bill has been improved was in the opportunity, prompted by Jeremy Balfour, that it presented for the Scottish Government to reaffirm our commitment to moving areas of competence and jurisdiction that the Sheriff Court currently has to the First Tier Tribunal in relation to the recovery of money owed to Social Security Scotland. We've made changes at Stage 2 which demonstrate this commitment, whilst also allowing a consultative and considered approach that will ensure that the transfer is effected appropriately, whilst guarding against unintended consequences. The final additions to the bill that have been made today, I'm pleased to see have had support from across the Chamber. These will, of course, bring forward the increase in the value of the Scottish Child Payment in line with inflation. I'm pleased and proud that in the teeth of a global pandemic, the Scottish Child Payment will open for applications in November, with the first payments to start from the end of February 2021. This is only 2 months later than our previous plans, despite the impact of COVID. The amendments we have just agreed will ensure the payment will be uprated every year in line with inflation from April 2022 onwards. Presiding Officer, once again, in conclusion, can I thank everyone who has helped shape this bill, and I move the motion in my name.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I now call Rachel Hamilton to open for the Conservatives. Ms Hamilton, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to open on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives today, and I want to thank all of those who gave evidence for the purposes of this bill. Its development has been an unusual process as we've coped with the COVID-19 restrictions. I also want to put on record my thanks to my colleague Graham Simpson, who was on the committee and contributed to these stages of this bill. The bill offers solutions with the current problems experienced through the 2018 social security legislation, as well as offering dignity and respect for claimants. In short, this bill corrects previous shortcomings in social security legislation that the SNP should actually have sorted out the first time round, and make several procedural changes that we on these benches support. Behind the legislation, we all must be mindful that Scotland's social security programme provides crucial support for people in need across Scotland, and people must have the confidence and trust in that system. We all know that we cannot afford to let them down, especially through these uncertain times during a pandemic. One aspect of the bill which I felt strongly earlier in the process was the issue of suspended payments, not included when the bill was first presented to Parliament. I believe this was crucial to ensuring fairness and understanding changing circumstances for claimants and their families. John Shaw of the Child Poverty Action Group emphasised the importance of this at committee. He said, and I quote, "Simply stopping entitlement in these circumstances will create further problems around passported entitlement to reserve benefits. There may be gaps in entitlement even if the benefit is later reclaimed. We believe amending the Act to allow for the suspension of payments will be the most effective way to deal with these issues." A number of organisations, such as Citizens Advice Scotland and Alliance, also called for the ability to enable carer and disability benefits to be suspended rather than stopped. CPAG raised a further important point that the suspension of payments would offer greater flexibility for claimants and would put a stop to the need for claimants to reapply. The DWP exercised the suspension of payments, and it was inevitable that the issue would arise in Scotland. However, we did not have the relevant legislation in the original version of the bill, as I said earlier. In written evidence, CPAG again reiterated this point, and I quote, "The power to make an award of benefit but to suspend payment is used by the DWP in circumstances such as when claimants go into hospital or care homes or are in legal detention. Payments are also suspended prior to terminating a claim when, for example, the DWP has lost touch with a claimant. All these issues will arise in the Scottish social security system, and I'm glad that the Cabinet Secretary recognised this deficiency and rectified the matter at Stage 2. Presiding Officer, claimants, as I say, deserve dignity and respect. Section 7 of the bill on terminal illness offers a wider range of healthcare professionals to certify that a person is terminally ill in order to fast-track claim for Scottish disability benefits. Currently, under the 2018 Act, whether or not someone is terminally ill is a matter for clinical judgment of a registered medical practitioner, based on guidance issued by the Chief Medical Officer. Given the fantastic work of the Macmillan Cancer Support nurses, I'm glad they highlighted this in their evidence to the committee. They said, nurses will already be demonstrating and evidencing the required clinical competencies in line with the relevant NHS knowledge and skills competency frameworks for their roles. In this regard, they do not require specialist training to act under the terminal illness provisions. However, as with all professionals, nurses should be supported to access relevant continuing professional development to keep their knowledge and skills up to date. By encompassing a wider range of appropriate health professionals and those with in-depth knowledge and experience, it ensures that those working closest with a terminally ill claimant can now make a valid judgment. Presiding officer, whilst this bill offers crucial support for those who need it, it is still worth examining the wider record of delivery from the government on the Scottish welfare system in a wider context. We know that all future devolved benefits delivery have been halted due to coronavirus, but fortunately we have been safeguarded in the position that the UK government have agreed to continue to deliver them on behalf of the government until they are in a position to safely deliver them. Nevertheless, this does not excuse the fact that this programme of delivery from the SNP government has already been delayed, with full responsibility for the devolved benefits not expected until 2025. What does that mean for Scots? It will be nearly a decade since the government received power over the devolved benefits before all cases were to be transferred to Social Security Scotland from the Department of Work and Pensions. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, we on these benches very much support the bill at stage 3 today. It is important and much needed opportunity to make amendments needed to address issues which have been identified since the passage of the Social Security Scotland Act 2018, including making provision for the introduction of the Scottish Child Payment. I want to thank those who gave evidence once again, which helped inform and shape the passage of the bill for the better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I call on Pauline McNeill to open for Labour. Ms McNeill, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Our work in building a social security system fit for purpose clearly takes many years and a lot of hard work. And it must have been a very stressful day, I imagine, for officials and the Cabinet Secretary when they discovered that there were some omissions of the original Social Security Act. But I'd like to put on record Scottish Labour's thanks to the Minister's officials and the organisations who have come together, along with the committee, I think, to come up with changes which are needed, and we welcome and support all of them. A robust appointee system, placing guidance for the appointee system into statute, including for adults with capacity who wish to be represented by an appointee. Nurses and other health allied professionals now able to sign off benefit forms, making it considerably easier for people to access benefits quickly. And the bill will ensure that fraud offences can apply to the proposed child benefit, Scottish Child Payment and any other Scottish benefits that top up UK social security. And we note that SAMH welcomes a commitment from the Cabinet Secretary to report annually on how often the powers to withhold harmful information from claimants has been used in relation to applications for both standard disability assistance and assistance on the grounds of terminal illness, ensuring a good measure of transparency. I wanted to say something about the child payment as the Cabinet Secretary spoke to the committee last week in session. So we know that applications will open in November, but you need not apply if your child turns 6 before the February eligible date. The Cabinet Secretary has put on record that that's because a flood of applications are expected, and backdating provisions would add a great deal of complexity, increasing the risk of error, adding pressure on the agency. And she says checking the eligibility for each of the 14 weeks from November to February would add a huge burden for the agency. And acknowledging the complexity of this matter, I do want to put on record that I know the Cabinet Secretary shall continue to work on this question of backdated payment. But I do believe it is a loss to many families who will feel that it's unfair that when applications open their child will not yet be 6, but they will not get the benefits, so it is disappointing. I also just wanted again put on record my remarks about automation. Myself and Mark Griffin, who have served on the Social Security Committee from the very beginning, raised this issue and continue to raise the issue, and again I acknowledge the Cabinet Secretary's support for that idea. But we did raise the issue that, given the Scottish Child Payment is a passport entitlement, and that the Scottish Government does have the data on exactly who is entitled to it, it does seem ripe for automation. I appreciate the Cabinet Secretary is concerned about the time it would take to build that into the system, and therefore we don't want to delay any payments in setting up that, and that is acknowledged. However, I'd like to put on record that Scottish Labour would want to see a commitment to automation of the child payment at a future date, and we would like to discuss with the Scottish Government whether a timetable can be set for that. It may well be that as we move into the next Parliament, that is a matter for a future administration, but I do hope that someone will continue to pick up this issue. I remain concerned that those in the most extreme poverty may not apply for their benefit. I think probably everyone involved has that concern, so continue to look at the most effective ways of advertising the benefit, and where people who have entitlements to other benefits may get an opportunity to see that they may be entitled to this benefit. Because we know that 1 in 4 children in Scotland still live in poverty. And as the Chief Executive Officer at Parent Families Scotland, Satwat Rehman, said, 39% of children in single-parent families were living in poverty before COVID-19, and the effect of the virus and resulting lockdown has only added to the pressure for single parents who are balancing the responsibility of caring for their children and bringing in an income alone. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, Scottish Labour welcomes the uprating of benefits. When the Scottish Government introduced the Scottish Child Payment in June 2019, it did make that commitment to uprate it annually in line with inflation. My colleague Mark Griffin again had repeatedly called for this, so we are delighted that it is now in the current legislation. As the first payments of the Scottish Child Payment will start from the end of February, the duty to uprate would be effective from April 2022. I think at that point we would all wish and hope that the work that's gone into this will ensure that there will be an extremely high uptake of the Scottish Child Payment. Scottish Labour supports all of the amendments, and I'm pleased to support the bill tonight at stage 3. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms McNeill. And I call on Alison Johnson to open the Green Party. Ms Johnson, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I too would like to thank all who provided evidence to assist our scrutiny of this bill. And the main purpose of the bill before us today is to make adjustments to our new social security system so that the Scottish Child Payment may be introduced, with Scottish Government commissioned research projecting relative child poverty could reach as high as the unthinkable 38% by the early 2030s. The child payment cannot come a moment too soon. Greens will be pleased to vote for the bill later today so that hundreds of thousands of Scots families can get much needed support at a time when many, too many of them will be under intolerable financial pressure. But the Government must leave no stone unturned with the powers it has at present to get additional money into the pockets of poor families. In response to very reasonable calls to uprate the child payment by higher earnings, growth or inflation, the Scottish Government has cited a significant and persistent impact upon the wider Scottish budget as the reason for not putting this in place. But the cost would be just £4 million in the first year, and the cost of child poverty itself, estimated at over £20 billion a year across the UK, has an even more significant and even more persistent impact on the budget. The Scottish Government's intention is to begin uprating the payment in 2022, and provisions to allow this to happen are in the Cabinet Secretary's amendments today. But a number of organisations have questioned why this isn't being done at the first opportunity in April 2021. This will be almost 3 years, with 3 years of inflation and 3 years of devaluation after the new payment was first announced, and this should be reconsidered. I welcome the bill's provisions to place a requirement on the Scottish Government to inform people about the eligibility to top up benefits like the child payment. It is vitally important to ensure that everyone who's entitled to the child payment is both made aware of their entitlement and supported to claim. Recent figures from the Scottish Fiscal Commission show the size of this task. the Commission projects that 20% of eligible families will not be taking up the payment when it launches for under 60s, excuse me, Presiding Officer, rising to 27% when it's fully rolled out in 2024-25. So when the payment launches, at least 39,000 children may miss out, according to projections. And that's not even taking into account those families who are not claiming the qualifying payments. How the Government intends to support those 39,000 families to take up payment is something I would be grateful if the Minister would address in closing. The Scottish Government has taken the opportunity of the bill to make a number of other changes, and they are largely very welcome. Our hard-working nursing staff will often know terminally ill patients better than any other health professional, so Greens welcome the bill's provision to enable more types of health professional to help terminally ill people access devolved benefits. And I understand this is primarily meant to apply to nurses. And I'm also pleased to see that the Scottish Government has listened to the Poverty Alliance and other groups in establishing a power to suspend benefit payments without stopping a claim altogether. There are a number of circumstances in which this would avoid recipients having to reapply, and this is very welcome. Greens recognise the need for benefit appointees to receive benefits on someone's behalf, and the Scottish Government has worked hard since stage one to incorporate safeguards, which are very welcome. However, I note that the Law Society of Scotland is concerned that the provisions are not compliant with the European Convention on Human Rights. The Social Security Scotland Act recognises that social security is a human right, so this is concerning to hear, and any assurances the Cabinet Secretary can give on this would be gratefully received. To close, Presiding Officer, Greens welcome the bill as a genuine attempt to make our social security system work more effectively and to pave the way for the Scottish Child Payment. While I do have some budgetary disagreements with the Cabinet Secretary, I respect the way she's engaged with me, the committee and stakeholders to improve the bill, and Greens will support it later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Open debate. Shona Robertson, followed by Graham Simpson. Ms Robertson, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Although the Social Security Administration and Tribunal Membership Scotland Bill is a short technical bill, it does make some important changes to the administration of Scottish Social Security on appointees, terminal illness and topping up reserve benefits. And of course, it also extends existing provisions to allow judges from other jurisdictions to sit on Scottish tribunals. And although it is a technical bill, it will do some very important things. It will allow regulations that create top-up benefits to include provisions on offences and investigations, and of course this applies to Scottish Child Payment. And one of the main reasons for the bill is, of course, the urgent need to create statutory offences in primary legislation for the Scottish Child Payment. Without this bill, none are in place for top-up assistance, and no powers currently exist to create any. The Scottish Child Payment has rightly been described as a game changer in tackling poverty, illustrating the need for this legislation now. Across Scotland, 194,000 children aged under 6 could benefit, according to the latest figures from the Scottish Fiscal Commission. Once fully rolled out to under 16-year-olds in 22-23, the Scottish Fiscal Commission estimate that there could be 499,000 eligible children. And in my own home city of Dundee, an estimated 5,200 children could benefit from the Scottish Government's groundbreaking anti-poverty payment. I'm sure there will be a good uptake of this new benefit, particularly, as others have said, during this time of added financial hardship and uncertainty. I also have some sympathy with the point made by Pauline McNeill about the automation of the Scottish Child Payment, and I do hope that this is something that can be considered in due course. While the Social Security Committee, which I'm a member of, was generally supportive of the bill at stage one, the committee report did state there were issues around the appointment of individuals to receive benefit payments on behalf of another person, and that required further discussion. I'd like to add my comments in thanking all those who gave evidence, which I think has helped to improve this bill. The report also made recommendations about non-disclosure of health information, top-up of reserve benefits, who can diagnose terminal illness and tribunal membership. The committee highlighted a concern about the lack of public consultation on the bill, stating that the proposals on appointees in particular may have benefited from more public input. However, I'm pleased that the Cabinet Secretary's response to the report took on board many of the recommendations made by the committee. The Scottish Government Stage 3 amendments allow for the uprating of the Scottish Child Payment, and of course the intention is to uprate this annually in line with inflation. During the Stage 1 debate, concern was raised over the issue of appointees and concerns about the lack of appropriate procedures and necessary safeguards. At the committee's meeting on the 10th of September, the Cabinet Secretary said that in response to these concerns, the Scottish Government had engaged with experienced panels, the Ill Health and Disability Benefits Stakeholder Reference Group and the Disability and Carers Benefits Expert Advisory Group. In response, Amendment 7 to the bill requires the guidelines to include information on how ministers will determine the suitability of an appointee, how they'll handle requests for reviews of decision about appointments, how they'll include persons with an interest in their decision-making processes, and crucially, how they'll undertake periodic reviews and handle any concerns that are raised. And of course, Amendment 7 also requires that all guidance be developed with stakeholders to be published, including a set of safeguarding principles, including principles that are drawn from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And finally, can I add my welcome on the issue of diagnosing terminal illness. I'm pleased that the Scottish Government has listened to the views of those on the front line, and that's why they're extending responsibility for diagnosing terminal illness for social security purposes to include registered nurses. That's very welcome indeed, and of course will help to avoid delays and prevent additional burdens falling onto doctors. I think that will help the Social Security Chamber cope with the arrival of significant numbers of new cases. So to conclude, Deputy Presiding Officer, I'd like to add my support for the passage of this bill at decision time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Graham Simpson to be followed by Stuart Stevenson. Mr Simpson, please. 4 minutes, Mr Simpson.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm speaking today as a former member of the Social Security Committee. I was technically in charge of this bill for my party for a very brief period in my stint as Shadow Cabinet Secretary for Social Security and other issues. It was a hugely successful period in which absolutely nothing went wrong. I had the pleasure of shadowing the Cabinet Secretary. I found her easy to work with. And I was also encouraged by her willingness to work with the DWP for the good of everyone we represent. And I do hope I haven't caused her any issues with the good people of Dunfermline in saying that. Now, I said in the Stage 1 debate that this is a largely technical bill, so I don't intend to speak for very long, and I imagine the Chamber will be delighted at that. The bill had 4 main themes: appointees, top-up benefits, terminal illness and tribunals. And on appointees, it would allow ministers to appoint a person to receive benefit payments on someone else's behalf if the claimant was a child or if an adult the claimant agreed to the appointment. On top-up benefits, it would allow regulations that create top-up benefits to include provisions on offences and investigations. This would apply to the Scottish Child Payment due to start early next year. And on terminal illness, it would allow medical professionals other than doctors to confirm that a person was terminally ill for the purpose of fast-tracking their benefit claim. On tribunals, it would allow the temporary appointment of judges from other jurisdictions to sit on Scottish tribunals, including those dealing with Social Security Scotland benefits. Jeremy Balfour and myself lodged amendments at Stage 2, and this spurred the government to lodge similar but better amendments. And myself and Mr Balfour, not being precious souls, considered that job done, so performed a tactical withdrawal. We had amendments on the appointments, amendments on the recovery of overpayment, on suspended payments, on overseas healthcare professionals, and on eligibility for the Scottish Child Payment. And you've heard about them already, so I'm not going to repeat what has already been said. Deputy Presiding Officer, this may not be the most contentious bill in the world. It's not, but it's no less important for that. It's an example of how parties can work together for the greater good. And let's hope that example rubs off on future bills in this Parliament. We can but hope.
Thank you very much. I call Stuart Stevenson, last speaker in the open debate. Mr Stevenson, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and congratulations to Graham Simpson, who makes the very bold and I'm sure entirely justified claim that nothing went wrong on his watch. He was careful, of course, to draw his claim quite narrowly, so I dare say we may have revelations at another point in his parliamentary career that draw a distinction from the claim that he's made today. But he and other members of the committee have done a fine job in bringing to the Parliament something which has such a universal consensus of the merit of the proposal that's before us today. The Social Security Committee has done a fine job. Now, in a perfect world, of course, everyone who requires assistance, everyone would be able to act in their own interest at all times. In the case of juveniles, of course, that is not an unqualified action on their part, and you need an adult to oversee decisions of juveniles. But the voice of juveniles must be heard in important jurisdictions affecting their futures, and the Children's Panel is an excellent example of where the child's voice is often decisive in determining what should happen in particular circumstances. So the appointment of someone to look after a child's interests in regards to social security is not a casual thing to be thought about. It's important that we are somewhat cynical as parliamentarians, as legislators, in our looking at this particular topic. Why cynical? Because a very small number of those people who are given responsibility will abuse that trust. And we need to make sure that there are provisions to cover that circumstance and penalties for those who take away from the deserving youngsters the emoluments that are provided from the public purse. So this bill takes good steps in ensuring that we can protect the interests of our youngsters, and indeed make some more general provisions in that regard. Now, of course, it also tidies up some of the imperfections in the previous legislation. It would be naive for us to imagine that there is a perfect act out there that reflects a perfect parliamentary process that reflects absolutely everything that might have been relevant to what's going on. Indeed, when this Parliament was established by the 1997 Scotland Act, one of the little errors that was in there, well, important, but it was an error nonetheless, was it made no provision for what should be done if, in calculating the last position to be elected from the list, if there was a tie, who got elected. And as it was first passed, everyone who was tied for last position would be elected to the Parliament. So far from our having a limit of 129 members, we actually, in a sense, almost had no limit whatsoever. Trivial, very unlikely to happen, but every bit of legislation that we might get ourselves involved in will have some flaw somewhere. If we're very lucky, it never matters and it never emerges. So I think it's right and proper that the government brings forward legislation that deals with some of the things that were not quite right in the first iteration of our legislation. I particularly welcome the provisions that bring beyond registered medical practitioners the view of whether someone is terminally ill. I spent a brief period 56 years ago as a nurse in a ward where quite a few of our patients could reasonably be so categorised. And it didn't require a doctor to know that. Even as a callow 17-year-old, one could see that the mortality was beckoning for some of our patients, although I would not have been sufficiently qualified to be someone whose opinion should be relied on in this. But I think nurses are often closer to their patients than GPs, than practitioners in hospitals are. They spend more time with them, and I think that's a good and proper thing to say. Let me just conclude, Presiding Officer, my short contribution to this debate by very much welcoming some of the things that Rachel Hamilton said. She said we should not be working together with the UK government. Well, curiously enough, I think this is a rather collaborationist government that we have, and that's a good thing, collaborating across the chamber, but also collaborating with the UK government if it's in our mutual interest to do so. Now, if Rachel Hamilton wants to argue that we shouldn't be doing that, I'll make common cause.
Can I just stop you right there, Mr. Stevenson? Can I stop you right there? That may be a short contribution, but you're already a minute and a half over.
I'm most obliged to you, Presiding Officer. One of the difficulties is, and I now, as I peer at the screen, can see the clock, and I will draw my remarks to a conclusion there by saying I'll be happy to support this at decision time.
Thank you very much, and I do appreciate it's difficult when you are remote. Can I just say now, notwithstanding scolding a little bit, Mr. Stevenson there, we may be bringing forward decision time to around 4:45, but that was in fairness to other speakers who were only getting 4 minutes. And now call on Polly McNeill to close for Labour. Ms McNeill, please.
Presiding Officer, there isn't much to add. It did occur to me when Graham Simpson reminded us that nothing went wrong in his stint in Social Security in his brief period, that in fact we've had 6 members of the Tory benches join us on Social Security: Adam Tompkins, Michelle Ballantyne, Gordon Lyndhurst, Graham Simpson, Jeremy Balfour and Rachel Hamilton, who we now have with us. I have to say all have made an excellent contribution to the work of the committee. And I say that genuinely, even to Graham Simpson. I'll just say, I wonder maybe it was a requirement or something to serve on the committee. But it really is a committee which, to me, so myself, Mark Griffin, I think I'm right in saying Alison Johnson have served on from the beginning. It really is a committee of the Parliament that I think is really worthwhile serving on, even if it's for a brief period, because what I think we've been doing here with the organisations that have been mentioned this debate and the ministers is creating something completely new from scratch, a social security agency for Scotland, and clearly there's a great deal of hard work goes into that. I just wanted to mention a few issues in the summary here. The recovery of payments, moving the jurisdiction from the Sheriff Court to the First Deal Tribunal, proposed by Jeremy Balfour, is a very significant and important amendment to the bill because it allows, I think, more access, easier access. Extending the duty to ensure ministers must inform people of their eligibility for Scottish Child Payment and other top-up benefits is a distinct feature of our social security system. We have it for other benefits, and it's really important that it is in this one, and it's a really important concept. The overseas health care professionals included in the bill, that they can determine whether or not a person who's terminally ill meets the criteria, is one of these niche areas, but will turn out to be really important for someone at some time, as it always does. And of course, the suspension of assistance and the zero value that's attributed to that is really an important provision because it allows the easier starting of a payment, as the Cabinet Secretary says. So in themselves, they seem like niche issues, but for people who need to rely on them, they'll become very important. So I recognise there's still a lot of work to be undertaken by officials and health professionals to work through. And we have the operating provision within, which kind of makes some of the work complete in anticipation of the payment kicking in next year. I just wanted to conclude by saying I was pleased to hear Shona Robson, who has made many comments, as well as others, about the importance of uptake and automation, and it shows that there's a broad-based support for that idea. I do appreciate, Cabinet Secretary, you can't make any commitments to this because we are closing our Parliament into the next Parliament, so it wouldn't be for you. But and I know you're committed to this, but it would be good to sort of set this up, if we can, for a future Parliament to look at a timetable that could be set for the automation of this benefit as a sign of things to come. And on that, Scottish Labour wholeheartedly support the bill. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And I call Jeremy Balfour to close for the Conservatives. Mr Balfour, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Obviously, this has been a consensual debate, so much so that even the convener of our committee hasn't felt we need to intervene. So it definitely has been consensual.
Well, Bob Doris.
Mr Balfour, I was going to actually intervene in Paul McNeil as Deputy Convener, but I'll now intervene on yourself instead, just to put on the record my thanks for fellow committee members when the Government informed us about the very short timescale to do scrutiny. I think the committee's done the Parliament and the people we aim to serve proud, and I'd like to thank you on the record for all your support in doing that.
Mr Balfour.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Dawes. That's probably the most positive comment you've made in the last 4.5 years. I think we have had a consensual debate. And actually, I genuinely, and I was moving on to this, to say that actually I think the committee has worked really well in regard to this bill in a very quick time. And I would, having slightly been rude to the convener, pay tribute to him, that we were able to take evidence, and through that evidence, we will then be able to bring forward suggestions and amendments, both by opposition MSPs and by government, so that we've ended up with a much better bill than it started off. This is very much a tidy-up bill, as many members have said, dealing with technical things mostly, but those technical issues affect people daily. If I can just make 3 very quick observations, Deputy Presiding Officer, I do think, and it's appropriate that Jean Freeman has just walked into the chamber, I do think when the original bill went through and when the previous Cabinet Secretary took the bill through, I do think one of the lasting things will be the issue around terminal illness. I think the principle of allowing people to get benefit as quickly as possible was a key principle that this Parliament passed. And it is something that I think future generations, those who are going through really difficult and hard times, will be in a much better position because of that. And so I welcome the further amendments from this bill, which tidy things up and allow the appropriate people to be able to sign the forms in an appropriate way. And I think we collectively across this chamber can be pleased and proud of what we've done on that. The second issue has been mentioned both by Paul McNeil and by the Cabinet Secretary, and that is in regard to the appropriate jurisdiction for hearing appeals in regard to payments. I do think it is wrong where we have tribunals that restart in the Sheriff Court, and I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's commitment to move quickly in regard to this consultation so that these changes can come forward, hopefully with again, cross-party support, but more importantly, support from the third sector and from other stakeholders, so that we can have a more fair, modern system that works well. Finally, and I suppose my one gripe still in regard to this, is that even where we are today is not where we should be. Now, I accept we have gone through a difficult 7 or 8 months and things have been put on hold. But we do have to recognise, as Rachel Hamilton said in her speech, that even if it hadn't been for this, we would not have had every benefit devolved in the 5-year term of this Parliament. And I think that is a disappointment. I think we could have and should have made quicker progress. And I think there are people in Scotland who would wish the new agency was looking after all their benefits. And I think, although we have disagreements, or others have disagreements with DWP, it is worth, I think, putting on record that if it wasn't for them continuing to deliver the benefits into people's bank accounts on a monthly basis, then they would be missing out. And so we can, and others will, have criticism of them. But I think it is worth, again, just making sure that we recognise that the DWP and the UK government are helping out to make sure this happens and the most vulnerable people are still being protected. With those remarks made, Deputy Officer, we are on this side of the chamber welcome this bill, look forward to it becoming an act, and more importantly, bringing forward practical ways that will enhance the lives of those who are the most vulnerable in our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr Balfour. And I call on Shirley-Ann Somerville to close the Scottish Government. Cabinet Secretary, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'd like to thank all the members for their contributions to today's debate, and indeed everyone who has contributed during stages 1 and 2 of the passage of the bill as well. Pauline McNeill, in her, I think, closing remarks, talked about the niche issues that are in this bill, and she's quite right. Some have called it a technical bill. I've even heard it called a dry bill as well. Graham Simpson quite rightly said that it's not contentious, but as many members have pointed out, particularly in the closing statements, that doesn't mean that the bill is not important. It is vitally important and does bring forward a number of vital areas in relation to social security. Can I also thank in particular Graham Simpson and Jeremy Balfour for the amendments that they put in at stage 2. I think that is in large part why we have the bill in such a good state as we move to the final closing today, Presiding Officer, due to that constructive engagement. If it's okay with Graham Simpson, I won't put his kind words on my election material in Dunfermline or elsewhere, but I thank him very much for that contribution. I'll certainly bear it in mind. I would fully agree that if only all stage 3s were as simple as this, and I would simply suggest to opposition politicians do feel free just to vote for the Scottish Government amendments at stages 2 and 3, as has been part of this bill, and I'm sure the Minister for Parliamentary Business in particular, who's arrived, would be very grateful for that too. In all sincerity, though, I think the suggestions that we've had and the input that we've had during this bill process has got to a point where we have resolved matters very positively in all the instances, and I'm grateful to all the work that's gone on for that. This bill does provide a package of improvements to the social security system. They are technical, but they are significant what they will do. As Jeremy Balfour quite rightly said, they have real effects and will impact on people in their day-to-day lives. This legislation, for example, will ensure that on occasions when it's the right thing for an individual to have someone else appointed to act on their behalf, that there are safeguards around these appointments, and that we will ensure that this is always in the best, most appropriate arrangement for that individual. A number of speakers have also pointed, of course, to the work around the suspension of payments to make a better and fairer system for that. When we look at the contributions that have been made during the stage 3 debate, can I point out to Rachel Hamilton that the work on the devolution of benefits hasn't been halted, but of course COVID has had an impact. That work is ongoing, and we will report on a new timetable in due course. One of the important aspects as we move forward with the discussions around that new timetable is the availability of health and social care staff to allow us to develop the delivery and implementation of the disability benefits in particular, and with the DWP, because we can't forget that this is indeed a joint programme, and COVID hasn't just affected the Scottish Government or the UK Government as a whole, but has of course had a particular impact on the DWP, and I will, again, as I have in the past, pay tribute to the work that the DWP has had to undertake during COVID to ensure that people are receiving the support such as it is through the system. But when we are talking about timetables, again, can I gently point out that universal credit was first announced in 2010. It is now forecast to be completed 7 years after the original intended date of 2017. So I think we do have to bear in mind that the Conservative work on the application of new benefits does not exactly come to this chamber with a strong record in itself. I also welcome Stuart Stevenson's deliberations at the end of the open debate on legislative imperfections. As always, we always learn something, I think, new from Stuart Stevenson in every speech, including the opportunity for an unlimited number of MSPs being an option which I think we could all agree is probably not something that anyone would welcome the sight of. But he does quite rightly point out to the challenges when providing a very large piece of legislation, like we did in the 2018 Social Security Act, around the fact that when there are amendments, particularly at a late stage, as there were for terminal illness at stage 3, it is not unsurprising if we move forward with some technical amendments to ensure that that is delivering what the Chamber, I think, wanted at the time, but was not able to be included in the debate at that point after the amendments came forward at such a late stage. Again, a way where we've made technical improvements to this bill that will make a real difference. Pauline McNeill talked again and quite rightly about the automation of benefits. As she knows, this is something which I am particularly keen that we move on. She'll be aware, I know, that we have ensured that the Scottish Child Payment is linked to the 3 payments of the Best Start grant and Best Start Foods to ensure that there's one application for all, and that will assist people as we move forward. But of course, we will review the Scottish Child Payment and all its workings, including automation, when we are reviewing the Scottish Child Delivery Action Plan. That's something which I've committed to in the past, and again, happy to do so. Both she and Alison Johnson also mentioned uptake, which is crucially important for the Scottish Child Payment. Both members, I'm sure, will be aware that the Scottish Fiscal Commission has increased its forecasting for the take-up of the benefit, due in part to what is planned for the communications and the stakeholder engagement work that the agency has in train. But this is something I can assure the Chamber that we take exceptionally seriously. The entire purpose of the Scottish Child Payment is to make a difference to families the length and breadth of Scotland, and the only way that we can do that is to ensure we are fulfilling our obligations to improve take-up in that process. Alison Johnson also pointed out about the Law Society briefing which came in around ACHR. I do appreciate the fact that they have concerns about whether this legislation is compliant. I think they were pointing in their briefing to amendments which were actually put forward at stage 2, but I can assure the Chamber that we are absolutely convinced that there is no difficulties with what we have put forward in this bill. In closing, Presiding Officer, when this bill was brought forward, the driving force was the Scottish Child Payment and to ensure that it was delivered as soon as possible. Little did we know then that by the time we reached stage 3, we'd be in the middle of a global pandemic. The Scottish Fiscal Commission has estimated that the Scottish Child Payment could support up to 194,000 children this year. That number has increased by 14% since the Scottish Government released forecasts in 2019, largely due to the increased universal credit caseload as a result of COVID-19. This tells us that this support is, of course, needed now more than ever. That's why I'm proud that we are using our social security powers available to us to benefit children and families across Scotland at a time when financial security is uncertain and some people are struggling and facing financial hardship. It's our intention to open up the Scottish Child Payment for applications in November, with the first payments being made in February. As I noted in my opening remarks, we were happy to be able to agree to the amendments at stage 2 and 3 across the Chamber and across the committee, and I think that's a testimony to the hard work of this the Social Security Committee and of this Parliament to deliver a social security system that we can all be proud of. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Yes, thank you, Cabinet Secretary. But when I'm waving my pen and glowering at you, it means you're running well over time. I may have to do other gestures. I'll invent some. That concludes the Stage 3 debate on the Social Security Administration and Tribunal Membership Scotland Bill, and it's now time to move on to the next item of business.
Thank you, colleagues. The next item of business is consideration of legislative consent motion 22868 on the Sentencing Bill, UK legislation. Could I call on Hamza Youssef to move this motion?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. The next item is consideration of 2 parliamentary business motions. Could I call on Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau to move motions 22874 and 22875 on designation of a lead committee.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. Decision time be brought forward to now. I wonder if the Minister for Parliamentary Business would move such a motion.
Moved with pleasure.
Thank you very much. The question is that decision time be moved forward to now. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you. So there are a number of questions this evening. The first question is that motion 22213 in the name of Bill Kidd on proposal for a committee bill be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The next question is that motion 22845 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on the Social Security Administration and Tribunal Membership Scotland Bill be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. No, I beg your pardon. Yes, sorry, this is a bill. We're going to have to move to division because this is a bill. We're going to have a short technical break while we allow members both in the chamber and online to access the voting platform. So I suspend Parliament for a few moments. Thank you, colleagues. We are going to resume parliamentary business now. The question facing us is that motion 22845 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on the Social Security Administration and Tribunal Membership Scotland Bill be agreed, and members may cast their votes now. This will be a 1-minute division, and then there will be a pause afterwards to make sure that everybody has registered their vote. Thank you, colleagues. The result of the vote on motion 22845 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville is yes 109. There were no votes against. There were no abstentions. The motion is agreed and the Social Security Administration and Tribunal Membership Scotland Bill is passed. Thank you. Our next question is that motion 22868 in the name of Hamza Youssef on an LCM on the Sentencing Bill UK legislation be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. And I propose to ask a single question on the two parliamentary bureau motions. Does any member object? No. Thank you. The question is that motions 22874 and 22875 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. And that concludes decision time. We're going to move shortly to members' business, but we'll just have a short pause to allow members to, some members to leave the chamber. Just be careful about observing social distancing while leaving the chamber. Thank you.